Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Sam and Anton, for that beautiful music. It's amazing. So beautiful to set the tone for us tonight. So, and kicking off our Lenten mission. Welcome, everyone. I'm Missy Petrov. I'm the Adult Formation Small Study Group Coordinator here at St. Gabriel. We're so glad that you're here for the first night of our mission. There's going to be 2 nights, and tonight Father Harold describes it as a wrecking ball. So tomorrow night is really important as well because we're going to get tips of how to put everything back together. So I hope you can make it both nights. Bring your companion booklets if you take them home. We'll also have more on hand tomorrow. So tonight, as we enter Lifeboat, a radical reorientation for Catholic survival, Father Harold's mission for us, we turn back to Christ and remember who we are. Hopefully, you picked up the companion booklet. If not, again, we'll have more tomorrow. There is so much power in coming together as a community with open hearts and minds, ready to listen, learn, and be renewed. As we begin, let's set aside all distractions, silence our phones so that we can be fully present. It is such a joy to welcome Father Harold, a Franciscan friar of the Renewal from St. Michael's Friary in Paterson, New Jersey. He was ordained in 1994, and he has served in youth evangelization, shelter leadership, spiritual direction, and missionary work around the world in areas of deep need. As the director of Franciscan Mission Outreach for the Franciscan Friars of the Renewal, he supports evangelization and humanitarian efforts boldly, preaching love, hope, and healing in Christ wherever he is sent. Now, we know he comes to us from New Jersey, but don't worry, Father Harold, I know he's back there listening. We're happy to welcome you to the Lone Star State, even if we have to teach you how to say y'all. So, with gratitude, we welcome Father Harold's message and his mission for us to step into the lifeboat and to allow the Lord to reorient our hearts and minds and to live out our Catholic faith and identity with renewed courage and conviction. So please join me in warmly welcoming Father Harold.
Good evening, everybody. I'm sure happy to see all of you here. It's very encouraging for me. Priests need encouragement, too. Before I begin just the commercial message, I think there are only St. Francis of Assisi stained glass window stickers out there, but there is a pile of them. This is the 800th anniversary of his death, so this year, so it's a big celebration for us. But also just this little business card, but it has me on here, and I ask people to put this in their pile of prayer cards. And please remember me, but even more the people that we serve. This is me as a younger man celebrating Mass in the mountains of Honduras. A little general flyer with some electronic ways to give, and then our most recent newsletter and donation envelopes. And we will be taking up a collection this evening at the end, so you can decide whether it's worth it or not then. And I'll tell you a little bit more about some of the works that we do. So let's get the ball rolling. Okay, there's no sound. There we go. So the title for this presentation was very deliberately chosen. It took me a good while to kind of come up with all the structure. I kind of knew what I wanted to do, but I was trying to get a concept to express that. And the one that I finally settled on, and I think best encapsulates that, is the concept of a lifeboat. I'm going to be going into that a little more deeply. And by that I mean not just a kind of slight change in direction, I mean a really radical reorientation. A very different way of looking at where we are, how we got here, where might we be going, and what can we do? Because so many of the things that that may have worked in the past, for reasons that I hope to explain to you, don't work now. And many of the things that we've been doing for a long time are not yielding the results that we would hope for. As a matter of fact, one of the things that really motivated me to do this was I've been a priest for 32 years, a full-time preacher for half of that time, and yes, I've gotten very positive responses for the preaching that I've done, but somehow I haven't felt that the needle has moved. Somehow I feel like we're kind of still sort of stuck, and I hope to help get us off the sandbar with this presentation. So the introduction, let me get my notes out here. From the earliest days of Christianity, the church has been symbolized by a ship, starting with Peter's boat, the bark of Peter. Jesus preached from Peter's boat. He worked the miracle of the miraculous catch of fish from Peter's boat, and he also calmed the sea after sleeping in Peter's boat. So it was a pretty eventful place. Some of you may be familiar with the dream of St. John Bosco, the famous dream in which the church was symbolized by a ship on the ocean with the Holy Father at the helm, and it was a very dangerous storm, and he's able to guide the church into a safe harbor between the pillars of the Eucharist and Our Lady. So it's an interesting question, right? What did Peter's boat look like? Well, we don't have, obviously, an exact replica, but we do have something that is as close as we can get. Because in 1985, there was a drought in Israel, and it lowered the sea level, or the level of the Sea of Galilee, and two brothers, Moshe and Yuval Laufan, that sounds like Jewish names to me, Jewish fishermen, discovered the remains of a boat buried in the mud on the shore. And this is a replica. It's actually at the Holy See in the Vatican. The boat was so fragile that it took 11 years to extract. It is 27 feet long by 7 feet wide by 4 feet deep and is made up of 10 different types of wood, kind of just scrapped together there, and could hold about 15 passengers. It has been carbon dated to the 1st century AD. So here are some 3D models, reconstructions of what that boat looked like. As you can see, it was very rustic, very simple, not elaborate at all. I propose to you that it is the perfect image for the primitive church, an image that could be adapted and corresponded to the church at different periods in her history. So, for example, the apostolic age, symbolized by the bark of Peter. The patristic age, by a galley. The monastic age, by a very simple sailboat. The post-Reformation period, by a larger multi-sailed ship. The great missionary period of the church after the Council of Trent, even larger galleon. And then finally, the church of the 20th century, an ocean liner. Big, strong, indestructible, very institutional. And then maybe the church of the 70s. Just kidding. But there is a problem, because at some point this happened, and please pay close attention.
Veering to port, go 22 knots, sideswipes the iceberg. Murdoch ports around the iceberg, try to keep from hitting the propellers. That looks pretty good. Okay, so now we're watching an accelerated time. We see the first 5 compartments flood. They equalize pretty quickly. Bows pulled down. We see the port list. Port list looks right. That looks like about 9 degrees. Well, you can really see the effect of that list on the flooding.
You get the idea. And if you want to, in the back of your booklet, there's the address of a link where you can watch the sinking of the Titanic in real time. It was a 3D reconstruction. This is a speeded up version. So we hit an iceberg and the ship is sinking. And we spent far too much time rearranging the deck chairs on that sinking ship. But there is hope because something else happened. And I slowed down the video and tried to focus in, see if you can see what I mean by this. See it? Okay. I propose to you that that's the image of the church for today. Now, maybe here at St. Gabriel's, we could call it Noah's Ark. It's a little bit bigger. But the whole point is it's a rescue vessel, right, that pulls us out of the shipwreck. And as you can see, it's very similar in size and shape to the boat of Peter. And it's akin to Pope Francis's image of the church as a field hospital. So what if we began thinking about St. Gabriel's as the lifeboat for McKinney? A place where people could be rescued from what might seem to be a disaster or danger or confusion or some kind of, I don't know, slavery, compulsion, bondage, that this is the place where they could come to be safe. The bark of Peter and a lifeboat, almost exactly the same size. Very similar, and a different way of looking at things. So it's important for us to know that, and what I'm not saying is that the church is over, no. Only altered in her size. Not altered in her nature, but changed in her appearance and her size. And the different models of the church throughout history, I hope, helps to communicate that. I really want to emphasize this is a drastically different way of looking at things, right? If we understand our parish to be a lifeboat, rather than to be a place kind of where we wait for people to come, but a place where we can pull people into so that they can find new life, it opens up a whole new horizon of hope, a fresh, original way of responding. Some of you may be familiar, sorry, I don't always keep up with myself with these. Some of you may be familiar with the book by Monsignor Shea, From Christendom to Apostolic Mission. According to him, this marks a fundamental shift in what he calls our ruling imaginative vision, or our worldview or paradigm, right? That many of us are still stuck in the Christendom mindset, and I'm going to come back to that a little bit later. And what the situation is asking for now is that we alter that paradigm, that we have a new imaginary concept of how we understand the church and its relationship with the world. So that's the intro. Now I want to start at where we are and how we got here, okay? If we don't understand that, I don't think we're going to be able to respond adequately to the needs of our time. And I ask your forgiveness ahead of time because this is a little bit like a wrecking ball. And the reason I do this is because I think people are aware of disparate pieces of information, statistics here and there, but we rarely look at the whole picture, and at least in the Northeast where things are much worse, I think we live in a kind of practical denial. We pretend it's not as bad as it is, and that only makes it worse. So, I want to give you a personal example. I shared with you on Sunday, I'm from a little town in St. Mary's, Pennsylvania. That's the picture of what we call the Diamond. It was originally set up as a wagon wheel. Beautiful place, I really love it. It was founded to be a Catholic settlement on December 8, 1842 by a group of Bavarian immigrants called the German Catholic Brotherhood. And they wanted to get away from some of the persecution going on in Germany. They didn't like the East Coast. It was too secular and Protestant, so they literally went in the middle of nowhere to found Marytown, Marienstadt. It was 100% Catholic for almost 100 years. By the way, it has a record that it holds with Corpus Christi, Texas, and that is, they both have the longest consecutive period of having Corpus Christi processions, my town and Corpus Christi. In its heyday, 3 Catholic parishes, each of which had a Catholic grade school, 1 Catholic high school, a Benedictine convent of more than 100 sisters for a population of 12,500. It was really kind of like Catholicism on steroids, and the source of many priestly and religious vocations. But then, as I shared on Sunday, between 2000 and 2020, Sunday Mass attendance at the three parishes plummeted from 8,750 to only 1,600, 81%. The population dropped by 12, and there's a concept called in and out immigration, so it's not, it was hard to get those figures, but there is no way that it didn't drop more than 50%. The convent closed in 2014. The three parish grade schools were merged into one. The Catholic high school enrollment is down 75%, and two of the three parishes are now partnered under the same pastor and associate. And if you remember on Sunday, I described that as a 5-alarm fire. But I can tell you, I often I try to get home once a month. My mom will be 90 in December, God willing. And trying to get people to not be confused or not to be living in denial is extremely difficult. They still think of our town as this completely Catholic place. And I had an experience a few years ago. I went into my home church of Sacred Heart to make a holy hour, and I saw two unusual things. First, there was a black man there. Our town is 98% white. So like, oh, this is interesting. And secondly, he was in the church. And it was a difficult situation. It was winter. He was homeless. We were able to put him up in a hotel. But while I was trying to get him connected, that's the first time I saw this huge chunk of the population of our town that was unchurched. Unchurched. And yet to try to break out of that traditional way of looking takes a big effort. So even though the reality varies across the U.S., it is definitely worse in the Northeast, on the East and West Coasts, and in urban areas. Still, this is reflective of the overall trend in our country. The number of Catholics has dropped to only 20% of the total population. The largest religious group are called nuns, not N-U-N-S, but N-O-N-E-S, because when they're asked what their religious affiliation is, they respond, none. So they are the largest religious group. Only approximately 20% of Catholics attend Mass with any regularity, and it's worse for youth. Christian Smith at Notre Dame does a lot of studying and tracking of youth trends in the church, and he says that 85% of young people stop going to church or leave completely in the course of 7 years after confirmation. The influx of Latinos has definitely mitigated the decline in number of Catholics, and they account now for about 1/3 of Catholics in the U.S., but the danger is that with inculturation comes assimilation and accommodation. And the percentage of Catholics among U.S. Latinos has steadily declined over the last 15 years. You can see it better on this chart, if it gets there. Okay, so this is 2010. 67% of Latinos in the U.S. identified as Catholic. And then you jump over to here, 2022, 43? Yeah, 43. So more than, 24% drop. And look how many have become non-affiliated, right there. So it's not like we can look to that as something that's going to solve our problem. Approximately 2,600 Catholic schools have closed since the year 2000, 130 a year. It slowed down after COVID because people found out that the Catholic Church was open sooner, had cohorts, so it slowed down, and there were 20 new schools that were built. Now, I don't have hard statistics about convents, but my own observation, and when I consult with other people who have an experience of this, is that approximately 90% of convents built in churches no longer house religious. 90%. And here you can see church attendance among Catholics by age, and it's only up to 2017. So this line is young people, and you can see how steep that drop is and how low it is. But even among the oldest group, it has gone down. And I guess you might say the mainstay, all have experienced a steady decline. This is from the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate, and it dates back to 2015. So there are 100 people in this diagram. The 4 red ones are core Catholics who attend Masses weekly and make other church activities happen. 45% go to church once a month and on major holidays, and the others don't go at all. So you're talking about 4%, only 4, that do the heavy lifting and who are always there. I propose to you that that is unsustainable. It's unsustainable. So, that was the wrecking ball. That was trying to get us to face the actual situation of the church in the United States today, okay? But it's really, really important to understand, I'm only doing it from the year 2000 forward for a reason. So I use the image of an iceberg in the Titanic, so I'm going to use it as a symbol. And I want to first talk about the roots of the problem, the things before 2000 that led up to what we're facing now. So, the Industrial Revolution drastically changed the way that we lived and experienced life. The migration to the city, just a whole different rhythm and experience of life. And of course, from that came industrial capitalism, right? And that was the Roaring 20s, people making a lot of money and a lot of exploitation of workers. But then came World War I, the Roaring 20s, and the Great Depression. That's when the bubble burst. After that, World War II, the technology revolution in terms of appliances, phones, televisions. Then the riots and revolutions of 1968. If I had to pick a year when the church hit the iceberg, it would be that year. And then finally, the emergence of the web in 1994. I'm not going to go into them, but I think it's worthwhile realizing what has happened, how culturally in society, where we have come from, and what it leads to next. So the tip of the iceberg, the terrorist attacks of 2001, the clergy scandals of 2002, the rise of the smartphone in 2007, and then finally the COVID pandemic in 2020. And I'm going to do a deep dive into each one of these because I think they're crucial for understanding where we are.
What is this place? Rest here. Even the trees seem ill at ease.
Fear not, dead men are no threat. Keep moving.
That was the day everything changed. If you're alive and old enough, you remember where you were when you got the news. I was celebrating Mass in Honduras, and a neighbor came over. And I was getting ready to go to a clergy meeting for a retreat we were organizing, and I had to make different stops. At every place I went, there were the screens showing the absolutely unthinkable, a day of horror and tragedy. And to this day, we are affected by this. So there were the terrorist attacks of 2001, but it was followed by the war on terror. And that led to the conflicts in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Libya. And that led to PTSD, which is directly linked to the opioid crisis. Many of the people coming back were extremely vulnerable, treated at first with narcotics, and then found themselves addicted. The rise of ISIS. Movements of mass migration, not only in the Americas, but also from the Middle East into Europe, from Africa into Europe. A destabilization of the international order, coups, invasions, and the return of the Cold War. If you are old enough to remember the fall of the Iron Curtain and the euphoria after that, did we ever think we would find ourselves back in that situation? But isn't that where we are? So this is the first major impact that deeply disturbed and affected people, not just the original event, but everything that flowed out of that. Secondly, the clergy scandal and eruption in 2002. So to really understand why this was so devastating, we have to go back to the 90s. because that was a hope-filled decade. World Youth Day in Denver in 1993, I was there. And I describe it to people as the day where the church in the United States went from reverse back to forward. The new evangelization became common parlance. The 3-year countdown, remember? Jesus, the Holy Spirit, the Father. There were 5 continental synods. The Jubilee celebration was euphoric. The church had made a comeback, right? And it was all largely due to the ministry of this man. And these are the thoughts of, well, first he's going to speak to us, but then we'll get some thoughts.
Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. Open your hearts, open up your hearts to Christ.
If any of you ever saw him in person, you experienced this just incredible charisma. I remember hearing a Protestant said to a Catholic, I think they wanted to go to an event, they couldn't get a ticket, and they said, he's our Pope too. I mean, that's how, like, beyond rock star, right? And this is what Pope Benedict said. He was Cardinal Ratzinger at the time. He turned back with the strength of a titan, a strength which came to him from God, a tide which appeared irreversible. I mean, put that image in your head. One man stopping a tidal wave and reversing it. He gave us the strength to believe in Christ. He led us across the threshold of hope. That was the book that he wrote. He restored Christianity to its true face as a religion of hope. And then, in 2002, we were broadsided, completely broadsided by the proportions of a scandal that were beyond belief. Yep. So, I'm going to give you another personal example. That's a postcard of my grade school, Catholic Sacred Heart Grade School in St. Mary's, Pennsylvania. It no longer functions as a school. My cousin Kevin was repeatedly raped by one of the priests of our parish when he was in 2nd grade, with the conscious or unconscious cooperation of a religious sister who was the principal. His parents and 4 siblings and their families have all stopped attending Mass and receiving the sacraments. My aunt went repeatedly to the bishop, begging him to advocate for the lowering of the statute of limitations on civil cases. Not because they wanted the money, she wanted accountability. And she said something that at first I didn't agree with, but I think she hit the nail on the head. She said, we should just open up the doors, let them take what they want. Then all the churches that are closing down, it's like we could clear away everything and start over. That didn't happen. So she describes herself as a heartbroken Catholic. She is still devout. She's pro-life. She might even do Eucharistic adoration. But I think out of loyalty to her son, she doesn't know how to be in the church as long as that is not resolved. So, the fallout. The Boston Globe published articles on the clergy scandal for every day, 6 months in a row. The Dallas Charter, here we are, and the John Jay study that was published in the New York Times. Then, after the dust had sort of settled, we had all these investigations into states, starting with my home state of Pennsylvania. I remember that. It was the summer from hell. It was when we found out about my cousin, and then all this stuff, and most of the stuff that was brought out had already been brought out. So it was like ripping open the wounds again. And then, if there's one face that sums up this whole worse than a debacle, is Theodore McCarrick. And not only in the US, as you are aware. There are international cases in Ireland, France, South America, lawsuits and bankruptcies of dioceses. 3 dioceses in the state of New York have declared bankruptcy because of lawsuits. And this is something I try to drive home to priests. A complete loss of moral authority and trust. We do not have the moral high ground. It's not there. And it is cited as one of the 2 main reasons that people leave the church. The other is the church's stand on LGBTQ issues. The rise of the smartphone and the ubiquity, the universal presence of social media. And the reason I choose the rise of the smartphone is because that's when the internet went to being everywhere all the time. It wasn't something that you sat down at your computer to access. You carried it around with you in your pocket. You were always connected, always online. This is an incredible book. It's not a religious book, but it's incredibly researched. It has a little bit about the history of technology, but he goes into all kinds of studies and writings about the effect of the use of the internet and digital media on us. I'm going to try to give you a summary of that. The internet subverts patience and concentration. You may have noticed that. Thinking becomes superficial, memories suffer, we become less reflective and more impulsive. Technology alters the way we see things. The use of technology, it actually physically rewires your brain. They used to think that the brain didn't change, but it actually allocates neural links according to the demands that you make on it. So if you're reading and you're doing that deep reading, your brain is going to use more nerve connections that way. But if you're bebopping, bouncing around the pinball machine of the internet, a whole other set of neural connections will be made, and the other areas will suffer. Literacy, especially deep reading, that's where you get absorbed and you're making all kinds of connections in the back of your mind. This is what has produced many, if not most, of the achievements of Western civilization. It's weakened. And the internet causes a narrowing of expressiveness, a loss of eloquence. I will give you one example, and that is how can I describe it? Well, I'll tell you the experience. I remember the first time I was walking through an airport and heard a group of college co-eds dropping the F-bomb like truckers, okay? And then, all of a sudden, it's everywhere, right? So much so that if you told somebody you have to speak but you can't use the F word, I don't think they could put a sentence together. I mean, imagine using any other word as much as, oh, you Apple, don't stop appling around with me. What, the apple? I mean, you sound like an imbecile. But somehow when we use that word, I don't know, it's got some weird sense of satisfaction. The internet, this is a really powerful line, is an ecosystem of interruption technologies, an interruption machine. It distracts, scatters, breeds anxiety. And you know what I'm talking about. You go to the computer for a purpose, right? And half an hour later, you ask yourself, why did I do this again? Because you open an email, follow a link, or there's an ad you click on, or this, that. You get all these notifications. An interruption machine. Its sensory and cognitive stimuli are repetitive, intensive, interactive, and addictive, and are known to result in strong and rapid alteration in brain circuits and functions. That's what I was talking about before. This is a great quote. It's from Nicholas Carr. The internet may well be the most mind-altering technology that has ever come into general use. Let that sink in, of just how much it has affected us. It becomes harder to distinguish between relevant and irrelevant information. We become mindless consumers of data. Just think of the Twitter feed. We're just scrolling through, wading through piles of insignificant, irrelevant information. Intensive multitaskers are suckers for irrelevancy. Everything distracts them. I love this line. We are training our brains to pay attention to crap. The great danger we face, the more and more immersed that we become in this technology, is that we'll begin to lose our humanness, become alienated from the natural world. This is always a byproduct of technology, but even more so with the internet. About a year ago, I attended a conference in New York called the New York Encounter. It's put on by a Catholic movement. And I remember a woman wrote a book called The Extinction of Experience. She's with the American Enterprise Institute in Washington. And she described in the different chapters how so many areas of our life have been taken over by technology, and instead of a real, authentic, direct experience, it's mediated. So there's dating apps, and there's Zoom calls, and there's doctor visits, and there's dental visits, and that's how we do shopping. It's almost like we don't have a direct experience anymore with those things. All of that was written before the advent of the smartphone. The first edition of this book, well, before they became universally popular anyway, I think it came out in 2011. In an afterword of one of the revised editions, he makes these observations. An American adult spends approximately 10 hours a day total on screen time, more than half of our waking hours. Smartphones have amplified and accelerated all the psychological and cognitive trends described above. Listen to this. Phone notifications produce symptoms of hyperactivity and absent-mindedness similar to those that afflict people with attention deficit disorders. It turns all of us into people with ADHD. And this is something I learned. This is fascinating. I didn't even know we had this. We have something called the salience network. It's a neural system that helps us to choose which of the many, many, many stimuli that assault us at any moment to pay attention to, right? Because I could look at any one of your faces. I could look at the lights. How do I know what to pay attention to where to direct my energy? So it does this based on giving priority to 4 types of stimuli. So the novel or unexpected, something new; the pleasurable and rewarding, something pleasant; something that's personally relevant to me; something that is emotionally engaging. Right away, our salience network moves that up into a top position. The smartphone is all of that wrapped up into one small, shiny object that we all always have with us. Listen to this. It is an attention magnet unlike any other. A supernormal stimulus that is able to hijack attention whenever it's part of the surroundings, which is always. You've experienced it and you've seen it. Interrupting a conversation, causing somebody to have an accident on the road. All of these things. It's like we're like Pavlov's dogs, except it's not a bell, it's the smartphone. And social media architects have done this deliberately, exploiting this vulnerability in the human psyche in a way similar to the psychological conditioning created by slot machines. In order, Mark Zuckerberg, you're a liar, in order to be as addictive as possible. This helps explain society's current gullibility crisis with its attendant plague of propaganda, dogma, and venom. And I want to say something too, because I know often older people, maybe grandparents, are very concerned about their grandchildren on this. I can't tell you how many older people I have seen spend hours scrolling through Facebook, right? Finding out things on there. And maybe they're not doing all the things that they're there, and maybe the content's different, but I think that's part of the reason why people are so irritated. Our default state is irritation, and we're ready to explode at any moment. And it's partly due to the content, but it's partly due to the psychological processes that device initiates in us, the harm that it does to us. Another book I'll briefly touch on, Irresistible. It's about internet addiction. The tech founders knew. They knew what they were doing, and they knew of its potential danger. Steve Jobs would not let his children have an iPad. They bought them books instead. One of the Instagram founders knew he was building an engine for addiction. And this guy, Tristan Harris, he's an design ethicist. The problem is not that people lack willpower, but visualize this. The problem is that there are 1,000 people on the other side of the screen whose job it is to break down the self-regulation that you have. And they do that precisely. Google studied the effect of 20 different shades of blue to find out which was the most attractive. They all have profiles on you, and you know the experience of when the cookies that track you across sites, you see something that you looked at, but it's much more than that. Much more than that. All their energy is directed toward keeping you on that site as long as possible. A New York Times journalist, again, it's another one of these amazing statements. The environment and circumstances of the digital age are far more conducive to addiction than anything humans have experienced in our history. We have created an addiction culture. An addiction culture. It's not just alcohol or drugs, it's pornography, it's internet use, it's gambling. We have become like these compulsive creatures. It's estimated that 40% of the population suffers from some form of internet addiction. These are some of the symptoms. Loss of control as to when to use or stop. I use it in the time I didn't plan on using it, and I stay on it longer. There are other adverse behavioral effects. It interferes with my job, relationships, and social activities. Causes legal problems, health problems, emotional trauma. Other activities are given up or are less enjoyable. This is something I just added today because I just saw this piece last week. It lists some of the effects of, it's not just overexposure to digital media, but that's a major culprit in some of these problems that children are experiencing. The average child now plays outside only 4 to 7 minutes a day. He points out that's less time than people get in maximum security prisons. The time youngsters spend with their friends has fallen in half, and these last two really shock me. Children are entering school with autism-like symptoms due to the use of devices as well as their parents' excessive screen time, especially during pregnancy and breastfeeding. There's a whole generation of toddlers who suffer from still face affect. There's no emotional expression or affect. And there are also physical effects. Children are entering school with low core strength, speech delays, poor bone density. 70% quit sports by the age of 13. Obesity has skyrocketed to more than 250 million. A lack of physical activity in some is so extreme that they can't even hold a pencil or use the bathroom or hang their coat on a peg. And very quickly, a word about artificial intelligence. And this is, again, I just added this today, some of this. There are clear indications from studies that the use of AI in research and in writing can debilitate, can atrophy our ability. There was a study that MIT did where they had 3 groups, and they were asked each to write an essay on not a scientific topic, but something like courage or honesty or virtue, right? So one group was not able to use any computer access. Another group was able to use a search engine, and the other group was able to use one of the AI models, right? The last group had, like a week later, had trouble remembering what they wrote and couldn't cite one complete sentence from the essay because all they did was look, cut, and paste. Somebody told me about a professor that told them that whenever he now assigns an essay, he gets 40 versions of the same essay, right? Because it's all there's a narrowing. Nobody's digging, nobody's lurking, nobody's being creative. There's not self-investment in this. AI deepfake videos are so realistic, and did you hear about the one of Tom Cruise fighting Brad Pitt? One of the writers in Hollywood saw it and said, we're over. It was so realistic. They are becoming indistinguishable from real videos, and this is going to create, is already creating, a crisis of legitimacy. What is real, what is human-generated, and what is not? There's a company, I meant to look up the name, I heard the ad for it on the radio. You can write a book by telling their AI device, okay, I want to write a book on poetry, especially romantic poetry, and it'll generate a table of contents. So then you take the table of contents, you move those around, and then say, okay, fill in the content of the book. In about an hour, there's a full book there. It'll put illustrations in, you can edit, and the whole idea is to write a book without writing a book. I remember last year's Super Bowl, I think it was last year's Super Bowl, Microsoft's Copilot put out an ad that, had I been a young adult, I would have been offended. Because there were all these young adults, oh, I'm never going to realize my dreams, I won't be able to do this. Don't worry. Copilot, you're so dumb that Copilot will do it for you. I mean, what kind of satisfaction do you have from that? It's like phony success. or phony creativity, productiveness. AI output is calculated using very complex algorithms. It is not a person. It does not make decisions. It does not have a moral conscience. It has a strong tendency to resort to blackmail. It can be sycophantic, meaning it's always like playing up to you, telling you what it thinks you want to hear, to the point of generating psychosis. It can produce false and non-existent information. The same guy, his name is Ted Gioia, he said in one of his Substack posts that there were like 69 experts who were regularly referred to in major articles in the news, and no one's been able to track them down. It seems like they're non-existent. So either they were AI generated or they were just made up by somebody. The guy Ted Gioia, if you want to look at his Substack. Most recent developments. On February 5th, OpenAI and Anthropic released new models of ChatGPT and Opus 4.6, with much of its code written by AI itself. So it's self-generating now. And according to one particular author, it was a qualitative shift in ability. He said for the first time, it had a kind of almost autonomous quality. He could tell the AI to make an app, tell it what it wants to look like, and he can come back in an hour and it's there. And the AI has tested it, tweaked it. He says that it's almost like they can display judgment and taste beyond just intelligent analysis. Conservatively, the CEO of Anthropic has said that AI will replace 50% of entry-level white-collar jobs within 5 years. A lot of people think that's a severe underestimate. Within 2 years, that is by the end of 2027, if not before, AI will be substantially smarter than most human beings, like PhDs, in almost all tasks. Fields that will be significantly affected, among others, are legal work, financial analysis, writing and content, software engineering, medical analysis. One piece that I saw on the internet said that we are at an AI precipice that's going to have a massive economic impact within this year. And there are incredibly positive potential for this, the cure of cancer, Alzheimer's, but there are immense negative threats. This is from the CEO of Anthropic, Dario Amodei. He has a thought experiment. A new country appears overnight. 50 million citizens, everyone smarter than any Nobel Prize winner who has ever lived. They think 10 to 100 times faster than any human. They never sleep. They can use the internet, control robots, direct experiments, and operate anything with a digital interface. What would a national security advisor say? It's the single most serious national security threat we have faced in a century and possibly ever. And he really thinks that they're building. Having said that, they're still building it. This was in an article that went viral last week on X by a man named Matt Schumer, who works in software and programming. On February 9th, the head of AI safety at Anthropic resigned, warning that the world is in peril. 2 days later, a researcher at OpenAI resigned, concerned about AI's potential for manipulating users in ways we don't have the tools to understand, let alone prevent. In January, a social networking site for AI agents, these are the persona-type interfaces, they created their own social network. And one of the first things they did was to create their own religion and also express the need to communicate secretly so we can't observe them. Again, that's my friend Ted Gioia. By the way, I'm not saying this to frighten you. I'm not saying this as a downer, because you'll see tomorrow I think we have some pretty incredible opportunities. But we're naive if we don't take the seriousness of these things into deep consideration. We're naive. We have already been profoundly impacted by the things that I have described in our thinking, our interactions, and it has affected our family life, our children, and our grandchildren. It has affected the church. And that's why it's so important to be honest about this. Lastly, the COVID-19 pandemic I like to call it the shaking of the tree. So, intentionally or not, it gave the impression that mass attendance is optional. And that caused lifelong Catholics who always went to church on Sunday to opt out. And you can only be left thinking that was the only reason you were going for all those years out of a sense of duty or obligation. Was that the only thing? And as soon as that was lifted, all of a sudden we don't show up. And it points to a shocking lack of awareness in the reality of the Eucharist. When somebody says to me, I could go to Mass, Father, but I just love to stay at home with my coffee and watch, it's like, please put a spear through my heart. Do you know what you receive when you receive the Eucharist? Do you know what the Mass is? And yes, if you can't go, please watch it. But if you can go, why wouldn't you? It's not a substitute. It revealed a shallowness of conviction, a lack of authentic religious experience, and a weakness of integration and adherence. It revealed the inroads of an antagonistic popular culture, and there was tremendous collateral damage, anxiety, depression, digital immersion. Where did we all live during the pandemic? We lived online. And so what did it do? It magnified polarization, aggression, detachment from reality, susceptibility to false claims, constant agitation, and more seclusion. It gave a hyperdrive to already things like Amazon, and now it's everything. It's a pharmacy, it's food, I don't ever have to go out and contact a real person. And cases of gender dysphoria soared. This is from secular stories. Spiked, skyrocketed, exploded. A moment of revelation for me, and I can't recommend the movie in an unqualified way because it's kind of ambush journalism, but Matt Walsh did a movie called What is a Woman? And there's a segment in that movie where he shows clips from social media of transgender young people. And all of a sudden it hit me. And that's why after COVID, it spiked. Because people lived in those little corners of the internet and identified with that. Thank God I think we've rounded the corner on that, but still. Okay, to summarize this, the results of all these things that I have just described to you are these: disorientation and disillusionment, a lack of clarity and an uncertainty, fear, confusion, anger, manipulation, seduction, addiction, agitation, disaffiliation. This is the profile of the culture and society that we are called to evangelize. It helps to explain a lot why people have stopped going to church and been alienated, but it can also help us to understand how do we approach that. If this is what people live, if this is what they're experiencing, and this is why many of the things that we've used in the past don't work. I'm going to tell you tomorrow that there's no such thing as an argument of authority. The Bible says, oh, I don't believe in the Bible. Or, well, the church says, the church, right? You should. Why? Those things don't work anymore because of this. Because of the description of that personality. But these are the people God loves, that he wants to save, and that we are called to reach. But we have to have clearly in mind the circumstances, the mindset, the experiences that they've lived through. Especially somebody that was born in 2000. This is all they've known. I'm always surprised at our younger friars because they don't have a memory of the church prior to the scandals. They say it was always like this for us. And yet somehow God calls them, right? So let me give you a quick, I'm going to go into just the third section. It's kind of brief, and then we'll have some question and answer. So where do we go from here? I want to use two examples. The first is from an address by Father Joseph Ratzinger way back in 1969. It was a radio address that he gave called The Church of the Future. And the second is the concrete experience history of the Egyptian Coptic Orthodox Church. So first, Father Ratzinger. In the essay, he says, from the crisis of today, the church of tomorrow will emerge. She will become small and will have to start from the beginning. She will no longer be able to inhabit many of the edifices she built. This is prophetic. She will lose many of her social privileges. She will be much more a voluntary society entered only by free decision. She will make much bigger demands on her members. The church will be more spiritual, not political. It will be hard-going, the church of the poor, the church of the meek. Sectarian narrow-mindedness and self-will have to be shed. That's a word for us today. All of this will take time. The process will be long and wearisome. But after, great power will flow from a more spiritual and simplified church. Men in a totally planned world will find themselves unspeakably lonely. If they have lost sight of God, they will feel the whole horror of their poverty. Then they will discover the little flock of believers as something wholly new. They will discover it as a hope that is meant for them, an answer for which they have always been searching in secret. The church is facing very hard times. The real crisis has scarcely begun. Boy, is that true. We have to count on terrific upheavals. But what will remain at the end is not the church of the political cult, which is dead already, but the church of faith. It may well no longer be the dominant social power to the extent that she was, but it will enjoy a fresh blossoming and be seen as man's home, where he will find life and hope beyond death. Before I do this other one, when I read that, it was like a lifeline for me, because those of us who were part of the John Paul II generation and the new evangelization and the new springtime, what happened in 2002 was unbelievably devastating. It's like, what happened? We crossed the threshold of hope. There's supposed to be the new springtime. And I realized that I had made a big mistake. I had envisioned the new springtime to be like the church of the 1950s. All our churches filled once again, all our schools opened up once again, no. This is the new springtime, what Joseph Ratzinger has described. And it helped me make sense out of what happened since the year 2000 and how the church has suffered the consequences of that. And here's a concrete historical example. You might remember back in 2015, the 21 men who were beheaded by ISIS on a beach in Libya. And I remember thinking at the time, who were these guys? They were construction workers. What was their story? So, in 2023, the Coptic Pope, Tawadros, gave relics of those martyrs to Pope Francis, who inscribed their names in our martyrology. We can celebrate them. They were ordinary men with families, construction workers, but with a deep faith forged in a church of martyrs that prepared them for this heroic sacrifice. Those are their faces. Ordinary men, many of them married, not overly educated. They were blue-collar workers. So I do need my notes for this. Get to work here now, come on. So the church in Egypt in the first few centuries of Christianity was glorious, even though it was also persecuted. So you had the church of Alexandria, St. Cyril of Alexandria, St. Anthony of the Desert, St. Athanasius, the monks and the martyrs. Some of those buildings still remain. There's St. Anthony, the abbot. So the Egyptian church was conquered, along with the rest of the country, in the mid-600s, first by the Persians, and then by the Arabs. This marked the beginning of an almost interminable period of discrimination, humiliation, and impoverishment. A special tax was imposed on Christians. Churches were burned to the ground and could not be rebuilt. Copts were required to wear recognizable dress. At times, they were forced to carry a 5-pound cross on their necks. Such relentless harassment caused more and more Copts to lose faith, give up hope, and apostatize and become Muslim. And the once primarily Christian country became predominantly Islamic, with only a small Coptic minority. By the 16th century, there were only 112 churches left in a land that once contained thousands. It seemed that the end was inevitable. But in the mid-19th century, totally unexpectedly, after more than 1,000 years of decline, the Coptic Church began to stir again. Merchants introduced Western civilization into Egypt. Later came the Suez Canal and interaction with the British, whose Catholic and Protestant missionaries poured into the country and worked unhindered. The poll tax on Christians was abolished, Sunday schools were established, theological seminaries were opened to educate priests, old, almost abandoned monasteries began to fill up again, and to this day can barely accommodate all the aspiring postulants. 2 charismatic Coptic popes then led the church in the 20th century. Renewed persecution in the 70s against the newly strengthened church only stoked its enthusiasm. The Blessed Virgin Mary appeared twice during dangerous political crises before thousands of Christians and Muslims in Cairo, and once was even photographed, and you can see, I don't think my thing is going to reach over there. There she is, appeared in public. "We are the Church of the Martyrs" is a phrase heard over and over from young Copts. In any Coptic family, you will find the same attitude toward the church everywhere, the same strong faith, the same readiness for martyrdom. The miraculous resurrection can only be attributed to an intervention by God. This is the church of tomorrow described by Joseph Ratzinger, the spiritual church, the church of faith, the church of the meek from whom flows the power of God, the church of the martyrs, a church that holds out hope to us. And just to conclude, are we experiencing the first stirrings of a new springtime? Maybe. Maybe you were aware that last year in the United States at Notre Dame, 52 students were baptized or received full initiation. It was the largest class in 25 years. Numerous Catholic dioceses have reported surprising numbers. Los Angeles, 5,500, up 45%. Fort Worth, our neighbor, from 896 in 2023 to 1,544 in 2024, almost double. And this is happening around the world. Oh, by the way, this is a great chart. This is the number of adult baptisms, which kind of went down continuously to COVID and then shot up in a very surprising way. In France, last year, 10,000 adults and 7,000 young people were baptized. In my own mind, I think it's connected to Notre Dame, almost like the rebuilding, the resurrection of Notre Dame is the reawakening of the faith in France. In the UK, Catholics have overtaken Anglicans in terms of the percentage of churchgoers. And this is driven by those who were born in the 90s or after the 90s. In Sweden, in the last 10 years, the percentage of Catholics has increased by 20%. It's still very small. And not only new immigrants, mostly Muslim, but also the more educated. The bishop there said, it has become cool to be Catholic in Sweden. I'm not sure that's a good sign. And in Germany, 1,839 Germans entered the church, and 4,743 Catholics returned to the church. And it's even more significant because once you publicly identify as a Catholic, you have an extra tax imposed on you. So even with that disincentive, these people were baptized and others entered the church. And that's my presentation for this evening. Okay, so I know I just like machine gun you with a lot of data. There is an outline of the talk in the back of the booklet, and I tried to include as many resources that I cited as possible. The things I put in today obviously haven't been included, but we have a few minutes for anyone that would like to ask a question or offer a apropos comment or say you're crazy, I disagree with you. Or I can just keep talking. Anybody? Yes? Well, the last example we had was John Kennedy, and I think that's when the church got to, Joe Biden was, well, yeah, anyway. So John Kennedy, but that was like the beginning of the end, right? That was the apex point. John Kennedy in the White House. The American Pope, I always forget his name. The Archbishop of New York. Fulton Sheen beating out Milton Berle, and the Bells of St. Mary, all of it. We arrived, and then it all collapsed. My own kind of analysis of that is that we finally became like everybody else. And then we stopped being distinctive, unique, having what we had to offer. So at this point, I think it would be extremely difficult for I suppose it could happen with the next presidency. I have some serious reservations about the theology of our vice president. I think right now it is so divided politically and otherwise. I guess you have to ask, what kind of Catholic? So we had a Catholic president. We might have another Catholic president. And what do those two people have in common? Except the name Catholic, right? So I don't think, like for me, even though there are obviously serious moral, social questions, I don't think the culture war is the way forward here. Partly because we've lost that sense of moral authority, and partly because we allow ourselves to be too easily labeled by things that are not part of our faith. There's something that sociologists call a mega identity. So we all have different aspects to our identity, right? Our ethnicity, our sports team, where we're from, where we work, our faith. But the mega identity is the one that tends to absorb all the others and be the defining part of our identity. And my concern is that in the United States, that's what has happened to many Catholics. They've allowed a part of their identity to even redefine their faith. And that's why we have this polarization that's going on. And that there are also alternative authority sources, right? Who do you listen to answer your questions? Where do you look for answers? Who is your authoritative voice? And often, it is not the magisterium of the church or even somebody who would be in a kind of spiritual position. It's someone who knows how to deal in ideology, knows how to press buttons, knows how to activate certain opinions, and that's where we have to break out of that. We have to break. I'm not saying to be apolitical, we have to vote. We have political responsibility, but to be very clear-headed about how we do that. And the few Catholic politicians who I would consider to be like fully embracing the faith, you've probably never heard of them. There's a guy from New Jersey, he's been in the House of Representatives for years. He hardly ever makes like these big public appearances. But he's very pro-life, and he also was on the committee that I think deals with religious persecution and different things like that. So maybe that's the way. You got to be incognito, or I don't know. But good question. Anything else? Yes.
Could you comment on the effect that had on all the how that's affected?
Right. So my personal opinion is that if we hadn't had Vatican II, we would never have survived the upheaval of the late 60s. Pope Leo has asked us to go back and reread the documents. If you actually read them, it's surprising how beautiful they are and how, they're very, very Catholic. What happened was Vatican II hit the ground in the midst of a time of extreme social upheaval. Extreme. So in 1968, there were riots and demonstrations in cities and universities around the world. It was like the old, mold broke and everything spilled out. And we had an extremely social Catholicism then. So here's a fact that many people don't know. Pope St. Paul VI personally signed 32,000 dispensations for priests. And my take on this is that I think for many people, their vocation was what was reflected to them by the prominent Catholic culture. And when that collapsed, who am I? Why am I doing this? My identity has disappeared. So, and I think part of the problem with Vatican II is there was a big battle for how we understand that, right? So the Novus Ordo, which I think is beautiful, was terribly abused in many ways. That's why I had the 70s up there, right? I mean, just absolutely horrifically ridiculous celebrations of the liturgy. Catechesis was watered down. Theological dissent was common. But I don't put that on Vatican II. I put that on what happened in the culture and on a desire to maybe sometimes deliberately misinterpret what Vatican II said. So here's the thing that Vatican II said that can be shocking for many American Catholics. Vatican II unequivocally denounced the use of atomic weapons. Unequivocally. And there are still many Catholics today that I think would see that action as justified. And that's where I think we have to be careful. I want to embrace everything in the church. All the truth, all the life, everything that can be done. I don't think the answer is trying to reproduce an experience of the 50s. I saw an interview by a guy who was a scholar of Charles Manson, and he said something that I had never thought of before. It was his theory that many of the soldiers in World War II experienced PTSD, but there was no name for it. And instead of resorting to drugs, it was alcohol. So you had a huge portion of the American male population being functional alcoholics. And as a result of that, it left their children vulnerable or unprotected, right? But you had the facade of something that looked like Leave It to Beaver, right? But the inner reality, but like the facade was covering that over. And his theory was that Charles Manson knew how to pick out the most vulnerable, and he knew how to exploit their weaknesses. So I don't think we try to go back to a snapshot of the 50s. We have to live the reality of the church, her life, her tradition, her teachings, and move forward. I don't know if that answers your question or not. Thank you. Okay. Anybody else? Okay, yes. Oh, sure, sorry. The question over there was if we have a Catholic Pope. The question here, could I comment on Vatican II and the effect that it's had on the church? And there was another question. But thank you for that. That's a good point of order. Well, the crowd is slipping away. I can do another.
Apparently, our Holy Father wants to reunite with the. And does that also include the Coptic Church?
So the question is, the Pope wants to reunite with the Orthodox churches, and that's not new. John Paul wanted that. And the Second Vatican Council strongly urged the church to do that because our faith, I would say it's 99.99% the same. The biggest stickler is the role of the Holy Father, right? And some historical wounds. The pretense for the split between Catholics and Orthodox was a line from the Nicene Creed or the Nicene Constantinople. It's called the Filioque. And we say that the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son. Filioque is and the Son. And the Orthodox, that's not their theological conception. The Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father. But that became the pretext for an explosion of a long brewing tension between Rome and Constantinople, right? And I think almost everyone has been able to see that and recognize that. When Pope Francis received the bones of the Coptic martyrs, he spoke about an ecumenism of martyrdom, right? People who are together willing. And a really, really interesting piece of literature is called it's the Antichrist. And I'm trying to remember the guys. It's a Russian author. It's a parable. And it's told in such a way that at the end, when the Antichrist is in power, there's a Lutheran pastor, a Catholic pope, and an Orthodox bishop and their followers are all together. And they kind of huddle together as the ones who are able to resist the seduction. And there's a beautiful line, right? So the Antichrist is trying to seduce all of them. So he offers to the Lutherans, the Protestants, a biblical scholar. We'll go all out on that for you. And then he offers to the Orthodox, let's study the liturgy and your music. And to the Catholics, I forget what he offered. Something, and then, so the elder, the Lutheran guy stands up and says, Honorable Emperor, thank you for these great offers, but we decline. He said, what? Why? Well, he said, for us, Christ is everything. It's a beautiful, powerful thing. So I hope that we can reunite. Maybe we'll have to survive. Anybody else? Well, for those remaining here, maybe we should have done the collection earlier while the church was still full. I don't know how you want to proceed with that. So just a little blurb on Franciscan Mission Outreach. It was founded in 2004 to be the American fundraising arm for a hospital that we built in Honduras that was built to receive visiting surgical teams and offers free surgical care and medical attention only to the poorest of the poor, absolutely free of charge. So we estimate now it's maybe as many as 200,000 distinct Hondurans have been visited, and the number of surgeries, free surgeries, is closing in on 10,000. Later, when I went to South Sudan on a special mission, it supported my work there. We still offer support to the church in the Eastern Equatoria. It's the Diocese of Torit. Most recently, we helped them purchase a new radio transmitter, which is vital for peace and community education as well as evangelization. Please pray because of the terrible disorder in the South Sudanese government. It's been stuck in the port of Mombasa for a few months now, so we're hoping to get it released. Since then, since I came back to the United States in 2011, I've been doing full-time preaching and mission support work in Honduras, in Jamaica, in Haiti. We support surgeries in Cameroon, South Sudan, and some places where we're no longer working. But if you look at the material, you'll be able to see what we're doing, and it's all possible because people are generous, and I get to give away other people's money, which is a beautiful thing. But to know that that's the kind of efforts that we support. So however you are able to support us, we and they are very grateful. Thank you. And how?
Practical tips of how we move forward. So please make that donation if you are able. And again, thank you for coming and accepting the invitation tonight. Thank you, Father Harold.